Hello and welcome to Time Warner Cable News' debate between the Republican candidates in the 21st Congressional District. The 21st spans 12 counties and 16,000 square miles in the North Country. That includes Glens Falls, Watertown, and Plattsburgh. I am Capital Tonight host Liz Benjamin. With me we have Watertown newsroom reporter Brian Dwyer and also Saratoga newsroom reporter Matt Hunter. The two candidates, Elise Stefanik and Matt Doheny, are here in the studio with us. They are hoping to replace the Democratic Congressman Bill Owens, who will be stepping down after 2.5 terms. These two Republicans will face off in a primary on June 24th with the general election 4 months later. Here are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to in this debate. It will be 1 hour long. We will ask as many questions as we have time for, and answers will be limited to 1 minute each, with rebuttals allowed at the moderator's discretion. Each candidate will get 1 minute for an opening statement and 1 minute for a closing statement, and the chance to ask the other candidate one question. And then later there will be this favorite part, which is of course the lightning round, where the candidates will only be allowed to answer yes or no. The order for the opening statements was selected by a coin toss, and we are now going to begin with Matt Doheny. Welcome.
Good evening. Thanks Matt, Liz, and Brian, and to Time Warner for hosting the debate. I'm Matt Doheny. I'm from the North Country. My wife and I are raising our family in Watertown, where I run my business, North Country Capital. I think tonight's debate in this race comes down to one word: experience. The experience of being a businessman, of saving tens of thousands of jobs, of the experience of traveling all through all of the 194 towns and cities of this district, knowing the issues and the challenges each and every person faces in the North Country and the Adirondacks. And lastly, the experience of actually growing up in the district, of actually raising a family in the district, and no matter what happens on November 4th, living in the district as we go forward. This is the experience that I bring that other candidates don't bring to this race. I look forward to the debate tonight to talk about all the issues that face each and every one of the voters here, and I appreciate the voters taking time to watch this debate.
Thank you. Ms. Stefanik?
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Time Warner Cable News. And I want to take this moment to thank my primary opponent, Matt Doheny. I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion. My name is Elise Stefanik, and I'm proud to say that I was born and raised in upstate New York. And I come from a small business family, a small business that I'm proud to work at today. I was the first member of my immediate family to have the opportunity to graduate from college, and after graduating, I went to Washington and fought for conservative principles and values. I chose to move home to the North Country to help my family's small business grow. And last August, I announced my candidacy for Congress against third-term Democrat incumbent Congressman Bill Owens. Since then, I've overwhelmingly won the endorsement of the Republican committees across the district and the Conservative Party nomination, which gives us the best opportunity to win back this seat this November. It is clear that Washington is broken, and we desperately need new ideas and new conservative leadership to create jobs and promote economic opportunity in the North Country, to stand up for our constitutional liberties, including the Second Amendment, to protect our military veterans and our nation's troops, and I'm looking forward to being that conservative voice. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. The first question will go to you, Mr. Doheny. As we know, both of you know, I think far too well, New York 21 is the largest in terms of geographical area, the biggest district in the state. It's one of the largest east of the Mississippi, as we like to say. What needs to be done, in your opinion, to make sure that a candidate from Watertown can be there and help those in Glens Falls or in Wilkesboro? A candidate from Wilkesboro could be there for the folks in Watertown. The district has disparate needs and disparate ideologies in some cases. And how could you have a true understanding of what individual needs are necessary in such a large area?
Sure. Well, thank you, Liz. A few things. Number one, I've traveled. I've been in each and every one of the 194 towns and cities in this district. So the first thing is to actually go out and make sure people know who you are, and more importantly, know what their issues are. Like number two, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, we're going to have a very, very deep constituent service outreach. Look, I'm a self-made businessman. I understand that customer service is paramount. And when it comes to constituent service, we're going to have district offices all over the district, not just in the big three, like you mentioned before, Watertown, Plattsburgh, and Glens Falls, but places like Old Forge and Canton and other places that have just been sort of left behind by the congressional staff. And then lastly, part of it, of my advantage of actually growing up and actually living in this district, unlike my opponents, is that it's home. Like, you actually know what the folks need, and you actually know what the issues are, partly from where you have worked, partly from where you continue to live, and partly from your knowledge.
Ms. Stefanik.
Sure. I've spent this past year traveling the district, getting to know the concerns of the constituents, whether they're from Jefferson County or Essex County, whether they're from Saratoga County or Clinton County. And unlike my opponent, I actually work at my family small business. We do business with hundreds of customers throughout the congressional district. We feel firsthand the economic challenges facing our Main Street businesses. I will be committed to constituent services. One new idea I have is to have a mobile congressional office that visits each of the 194 towns and villages over the course of the year, so that you don't have to go to the district office. The district office comes to you to hear about your concerns firsthand. I also want to designate a full-time staffer to help North Country small businesses apply for grants to help grow our economy in the district. And I also will have a full-time staffer designated to help the hardworking families who have been negatively impacted by Obamacare.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. This question goes to you, Ms. Stefanik. Of course, it was Memorial Day, which has our minds on veterans this past weekend. The Department of Veterans Affairs is under fire for long wait times, as you know, at its hospitals and improper record keeping. Many people are calling for the resignation of VA Secretary Eric Shinseki, including your opponent, just recently. In response, the Obama administration at this point is allowing more veterans to be treated at private hospitals instead. What do you think needs to be done to improve care for veterans, and also do you agree with the call for resignation? I do agree with the call for the resignation of Secretary Shinseki, but unlike my opponent, I actually have reached out to veterans across this district and formed a Military Veterans Advisory Committee to hear what local veterans need most. And Liz, as you brought up, we need to provide private health care options for our veterans. As I travel around this district, many of our veterans have to travel up to 2 to 3 hours to get the health care that they need. I want to ensure that as our veterans, instead of traveling to Albany, they have access to our local hospitals within the district to provide high-quality health care. There is no greater public service than you can offer our country than serving, and I am committed to being a strong voice, protecting our veterans, and ensuring that they receive the services and health care that they've earned. Would that include, in your opinion, increasing the budget? That would include increasing the budget, Liz. I don't support the cuts to military veterans' benefits. Mr. Doheny?
Yes, I mean, I have called for the generals to step down. When you think about where the VA is, and since President Obama's come in office, the budget has increased almost twofold. And so what it comes down to is folks in D.C. just can't get it right. When you have this type of system where we have delays and upon delays, that just says, you know what, we need an outside businessman. We don't need another DC insider to run the VA or other parts of healthcare. What we need is someone who actually believes in accountability. Right. If you don't get the job done, guess what? In my business and the businesses I'm involved with, that person's not around any longer. Number 2, transparency. Let's find out what's really going on. I mean, no greater crime than to say, all right, this is what's happening, which is a lie, and then going forward to say, oh, we're going to try to cover it up. That's what's going on here. And then lastly, flexibility. I mean, government has been too rigid to say this box and this point. And so when you think about the North Country, we have to make sure that people are covered here. Like, for instance, you know, Malone continues to hang in the balance as one of the various VA clinics here and is operating on a month-to-month, kicking the can down the road. Now, I will try to keep Malone, make sure the VA clinic's there, but it's that local knowledge I have to make sure that we can treat and make sure the VA folks and all the soldiers and veterans have the coverage they need. And just to put the same question to you, would you support increased funding for the VA? I certainly wouldn't cut the funding. I do support increased funding. But again, with the funding we have, let's actually make sure there's accountability. I mean, this is the problem with the federal government. We can't send more D.C. people to Washington because time and time again, they just take more of our money and don't get results. This is a perfect example of government gone amok, and we need transparency and accountability. Okay, let's stay with healthcare for a moment, if you would. This is to you, Mr. Doheny. We've talked a lot, and I've spoken to both of you about this, of course, about Obamacare. It's, again, a clarion call for repeal by the Republicans, the House Republicans. These measures, of course, have stalled because we have a Democrat-controlled U.S. Senate. But that might change in the election. And here in New York, you have 1 million people signed up for insurance in the New York Exchange. It's been very popular. Do you support the legislation specifically and repealing the law? Would you vote yes if it comes up again? And then what would you replace it with? I would, Liz. We need to pull Obamacare out by its root before it's too late. And so when you go around to all the small business folks and you talk to all the tens of thousands of people that I have all over this 21st district, they're outraged. They're worried. The premiums have gone up. The coverage is being smaller. And guess what? Not a single person said, hey, Matt, please keep Obamacare. And I've met thousands of people, right? Now again, life does go forward and there has to be a transition. Like the first thing we have to do is make sure there's portability. The key is to overcoming one of the biggest challenges of having people who are not insured and have the pre-existing condition problem is you have to step one, get them coverage at age 18 and to make sure they have the flexibility for a policy to follow them even if they change jobs or careers or whatnot. So that's number one. Number two, we have to bring some common sense back to healthcare. We don't want to disassociate people from their healthcare providers. Unfortunately, we've seen right now healthcare has gone by way of government bureaucrat. Like right now, we don't even have the 15-person unelected body called IPAB who will actually dictate who gets covered in which way and how. And right now, it's left to the Department of the Secretary of Health and Human Services. This is wrong for North Country families. It's wrong, and we need to stop it now before it's too late.
Ms. Stefanik.
I support the full repeal of Obamacare because for me, it's personal. My family's small business had our health care coverage canceled as a result of Obamacare. The options we were given were a 30% premium increase, higher deductibles, and higher out-of-pocket costs with lesser choice. That's a lose-lose for our small businesses in the North Country who have to face the tough decision, do we absorb those costs or do we pass them along to our hardworking employees' families? Obamacare is a job killer. We need to focus on common sense health care reform in this country to lower cost and increase quality and accessibility, especially in our rural communities like the North Country. Some of my ideas that I've put forth are allowing health care to be purchased across state lines, pursuing tort reform to help lower the costs of health care today, giving individuals the same tax incentives that small businesses have, and allowing small businesses to pool together in high-risk insurance pools.
Thank you very much. Matt?
And sticking with an area regarding public health, a large portion of the district, as we know, shares a border with Vermont, which has gained national attention, unfortunately, for its heroin crisis. And across the border in counties like Warren, Washington, and Essex, local leaders are saying the problem has already reached epidemic proportions. In this past weekend, we saw Senator Schumer urge his colleagues to approve an additional $100 million for funding of high-intensity drug trafficking areas. Do you agree with this approach? Do you think something else is needed to address this issue?
I think we absolutely need to address this issue. As I've traveled to Washington County, even in Clinton County and Essex County, the increase in heroin and meth use is very concerning to me. I've talked to families whose members of their communities have been affected by the increase in drug use. So I do think we should be looking at proposals like Senator Schumer's to increase funding to raise the awareness of this issue. We don't hear enough about this issue. We need more of our local elected officials to speak out on this issue because it affects our young and our best and brightest.
Mr. Doheny?
It's a real problem. I mean, I've met with the local elected officials who have actually sounded the alarm, whether you're the district attorney in Franklin County or St. Lawrence County, where if you go to downtown Malone, I've knocked on doors where people are like, you have to stop the drug trade. You know, neighborhoods in Messina that were once, vibrant middle-class neighborhoods, they're like, we have drug problems. Like, it's one person said they knocked my mailbox off right here on my front porch when I was up. I mean, that's the type of situation that we have, and we need to be serious about it. So in this case, I do stand with Senator Schumer that at least $100 million of funding to stop this crisis. It's not an ephemeral issue. When you live in Messina, when you live on the border, when you're having your communities ripped apart by the drug trade, where again, once vibrant communities are left to shelves because the drugs and the associated behavior and people that come along with it is a real problem. So I will work very closely with the elected officials who are currently working on this and to make sure that this stops.
Moving on to a different border, obviously the 21st district here in Canada, the relationship of trying to get back and forth and that sort of thing has become an important one for the folks here and the folks in Canada. But we often kind of hear about some imbalances when it comes to duty taxes and that sort of thing, and wine has been an issue with agriculture being such an important part of this district. A Canadian or American can go to Canada and bring back wine and pay a 3% tax, but the opposite way around is hurting American businesses, near 40% tax on wine. What do you support in terms of what do you do in terms of trying to ensure that American businesses can benefit the same way that Canadian businesses can in what's supposed to be a very well-shared partnership? Matt.
Yes, thank you. This is something that's very important to me. I grew up in Alexandria Bay, right on the border, and certainly growing up, I spent a tremendous amount of time in Canada. I know the deep relationship that we have, whether you live in Quebec to the north or Ontario to the west. And this is very important. And so I will seek to, if not abolish, to certainly reduce these taxes because it's literally the friction costs that hurt our businesses. We have a developing wine trail. Wineries, even in the North Country in the winter, we have winter-resistant grapes, and we're being able to go ahead and develop that type of industry. That is the technology married with agriculture that we need right here in the 21st. So look, I will work with the ambassador, I will work with the president, whoever party it is, and work with the trade officials both in the U.S. and Canada to make sure that not only do we reduce, but hopefully eliminate those types of tariffs. I mean, look, this is part of why I'm running for Congress. Look, I understand the challenges in the North Country, but we need to make sure that the businesses we do have can sell the product. And guess what? Sometimes it's someone in a foreign country, it's a lot closer than other cities around the country and the world.
Ms. Stefanik.
My family business actually does business with Canadian businesses on a weekly basis. We buy supplies and our products from Canadian businesses as well as domestic products. So we actually understand the relationship with Canada and how important it is to this district. I share my primary opponent's concern with the high taxes and the high tariffs. We need to promote increased commerce across the border. I think one way that we can make our country more competitive, which will of course help the North Country district, is making the corporate tax rate more competitive. We're the highest taxed country in the world in terms of the corporate tax rate. So lowering that, I think, will make us much more competitive. As I said, you know, we work with Canadian businesses on a day-to-day basis, and particularly in the Clinton County, Essex County area, we need to encourage Canadian businesses to continue to open up parts of their company to help provide jobs in the North Country.
Right. It's kind of the agricultural theme, staying with it. The Farm Bill has passed, so that's not necessarily as much of a concern now for farmers, and agriculture is such a big part of this district. But there are still a lot of concerns on the farm, and one would be getting people to work and do some of the jobs that maybe aren't necessarily the prettiest or the best, easiest jobs to do, milking cows and cleaning and that sort of thing. There's been issues of federal agents coming in and raiding farms here in this district. What do you support in terms of a guest worker program? Do we need to expand this guest worker program out a little bit, or is there a different way to do this, because we're having such a hard time as an agriculture industry in getting Americans to come in and want to do these jobs? Ms. Stefanik?
I think we need to take the ag worker program out of the comprehensive immigration debate at the national level. We need those jobs to be filled to help our farmers grow in this district. So I support reforming the H-2A visa program. I think we need more certainty. This is something that I hear directly from the farmers, dairy farmers especially in this district. So I think we need to have a conversation. I've focused on touring all the local family farms that I can get to in the district, and it's a real concern to ensure that we have workers that we need. So we need to take that out of the national discussion, focus on what our North Country district needs, which is more certainty for H-2A visa and workers in the ag industry.
Mr. Feeney?
I've been on hundreds of farms over the last several years all over this great district, from Washington County all the way up to home in Jefferson County. And one thing comes clear. I ask, how do you milk the cows? How do you operate the farm? And time again, it's like, we've tried. We've tried XYZ versus some local high school. Doesn't work. And so what we have now is immigration challenge. So my policy is very simple, that we need to have a different program, okay? We need to make sure that for 3 to 5 years, which is really sort of the duration, that people would come and actually help on the family farms, because this is big business. This is true family farms and other agricultural interests that actually make the difference here in the North Country. So again, I want all the farmers out to know that if I'm fortunate enough to go to Congress, that we will try to pass reform, at least in this one sense, that you can go ahead and make sure that the people you need to help on the farm will be there for 3 to 5 years. It's a very common sense approach. Again, we need to send folks who have business experience who understand how challenging it is to go ahead and meet the bottom line on a day-to-day, week-to-week, and year-to-year basis, and I'm here to help them.
Okay, so at this point we'd like to give each of these candidates an opportunity to ask the other question, and we're going to stick with the order that we established earlier, which means, Mr. Doheny, you get to go first.
Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.
Would you tell the voters of the 21st Congressional District why you didn't vote in this district in 2010 or 2012?
I voted absentee. I was working in Washington at the time, and I voted absentee in Albany County.
Are you satisfied with the answer?
Okay, that's fine. You didn't vote here, right? I mean,
I voted here in 2013, Matt.
Okay.
My family's had a home here since I was 3 years old. But what I'm focused on is what voters in this district care about, which is who's going to be the better voice to create jobs, promote economic opportunity, fight for our constitutional liberties, and I'm committed to being that voice.
Ms. Stefanik, your turn.
Matt, You admire President Ronald Reagan, whose 11th commandment is speak no ill of another fellow Republican. Are you proud that you filled Republican primary voters' mailboxes with untruthful statements attacking my public service experience?
Oh, that couldn't be further from the truth. What we've done is gone on and actually talked about the realities and the truth of the situation.
Your own hometown newspaper said that the statements were untruthful.
Again, it's very much truthful. It's 100% accurate. I mean, look, the reality is you didn't grow up in this district here, and you spent your time in Washington.
Are you proud of lying? Say that I support bailouts when I don't support bailouts?
Can I finish? I'm sorry. I'm proud of the race that we're in now. We're telling the truth right now, which is, again, your record. And I'm sorry that you're uncomfortable with that, but that's just the reality of it all there. We told the truth, and that's what the facts are.
Here's the difference, Liz. I'm running a positive campaign focused on the issues, and my opponent offers nothing more than negative mudslinging and filling Republican voters' boxes with untruthful statements about my public service record.
And just before we move on, though, to be clear for both candidates, do you believe that residency is an issue at all, is a fair issue to be discussing in this campaign? Because actually, neither of you have been lifelong residents of this district.
I do think it's a fair issue, Liz, and my family's owned a home since I was 3 years old in Willsboro. I learned to ride my bike, I learned to swim, I work there today, and I plan on living here and raising my family here.
Well, that's good news, Liz. Of course it's an issue. Look, everybody knows I grew up in the district. Did I spend a little time away working? Yeah, and that's part of why I want to run for Congress, to make sure that anyone who wants to stay here for their entire life can do it. You know, my wife and I, we live in Watertown. Our son was born in Samaritan Hospital. This is where we're going to spend our days. I think it's a crucial issue, and people should know the truth. Clearly, my opponent's uncomfortable with that, and, you know, so be it. Let's see what happens with the voters say.
I don't hold it against you that you were born in New Jersey, Matt.
She said she's uncomfortable.
Okay,
so.
all right, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to, I think, an issue that all of us can agree on, which is the economy, which is important in the 21st and also across the state. Matt? And
we've seen locally here in recent months throughout the district, companies like GM and Alcoa out in Messina and closer here to Albany. We've seen GE, Mount McGregor Prison, and of course Covidian have all closed down or announced that they'll soon be closing down. And when you add it up, that amounts to more than 1,000 job losses. Where just to the south in Saratoga County, we see companies like Global Foundries in the tech sector leading somewhat of a jobs boom. So what could you do from Congress to see that growth is sort of seen just to the north in the 21st district? And we'll start with Ms. Stefanik.
Sure. Because of my family's background in small business, we understand how to make businesses grow and how to provide jobs in this district. I think there are a few key steps we can take at the federal level. One, cut taxes. Overhaul the tax code to make a flatter, fairer tax system that benefits small businesses and encourages them to grow. Two, reduce the regulatory burdens that are strangling our small businesses. We feel this in my family's small business, and I hear this as I travel across the district, that the increased red tape is hampering small businesses of creating jobs. And three, I think we need to repeal Obamacare. As I've discussed before, this is an issue that I've heard across the district. And I also think more locally, we need to focus on our partnership with Canadian businesses, which have allowed our economy to grow in Clinton County. And I think we need to focus on manufacturing jobs and some of the growing sectors of our local economy.
Mr. Doheny?
I am a businessman. I'm a self-made businessman. I work on these issues every single day. I know the difference between a balance sheet and an income statement. That's why I'm well positioned and the best candidate that our Republican voters and hopefully the voters of the 21st District can send to Washington, because this is why I'm in the race. Look, three things that we need to do is make sure we have 21st century infrastructure, whether it's making sure that Route 11 gets upgrades or we have additional sewers and the water and the like to actually make sure we can deal with the growth. But also 21st century infrastructure in terms of telecommunications. There are parts of this district that don't have cell phone coverage. On my watch, I will do everything I can to make sure that we have cell phone coverage and broadband. Like number two, regulation. I hear it all over the district. People got me, you know what, taxes are bad enough, but when you add insult to injury, the regulatory burden continues to get great. Now, certainly part of it's the state as well, but certainly in the federal impact. When you think about Obamacare, really the granddaddy of all regulations, people have had enough to say, please go to Washington, please pull it out by its roots. And then lastly, we're going to focus on local issues. Look, the economy is such a large district, as Liz talked about, there's different subsets. Look, if you're on Old Forge or Alexandria Bay, where I grew up, you're about tourism. If you live in Warren or Washington County, there's certainly a subset that talks about paper, talks about medical devices. So we're going to have a plan, and we're going to go ahead and, like a business person, not just say one size fits all, but make sure we have a sub-regionalized economic plan, and most importantly, help the people on the ground. Washington's not going to create jobs. DC insiders aren't going to create jobs. It's the hardworking people and the entrepreneurs on the ground that will.
I actually agree with Matt. I think infrastructure funding and investment is important for the district as well as broadband. But I also think what's important for for our district's economy is protecting Fort Drum, and I'm committed to being a voice to protect Fort Drum and our military post in the district.
That's a
That
great segue.
leads us perfectly into the next question. Obviously, Fort Drum is so important to what the North Country does, and we continually hear about 18,000 soldiers, 4,000 civilian workers, 19,000 family members, the $1.4 billion of infusion into the North Country economy. But there's always that word that we hear about called sequestration. Mm-hmm. It's a major concern about what's going on with Fort Drum. Now, there was a study done recently that was a worst-case scenario study that said, what happens if we take 16 of these 18,000 soldiers away from Fort Drum, which I would imagine would be devastating. So what do you do as someone who will be a freshman coming into the position that you're in to make your voice heard, to make what you need to do to make sure that Fort Drum gets its fair shake and everyone understands the importance of how you feel Fort Drum is in that kind of area? And we'll start with Mr. Doheny.
Oh, I know the crucial importance of Fort Drum firsthand. I remember September 11th, 1984. That's when then Congressman, God rest his soul, David O.B. Martin, announced that the new 10th Mountain Light Infantry Division was going to become the 10th Mountain Division of Fort Drum. Changed my life. Look, we got cable TV in Alex Bay. There was a mall built in Watertown. So I know firsthand how critically important making sure that Fort Drum not only stays but grows. So again, I believe in playing offense, not defense. So when it comes to Fort Drum, we have opportunities to expand. There could be another brigade that's brought. We could have missile defense. We could actually have drones. All those things will continue to make Fort Drum, which is a very new, very important national footprint, to go forward. Look, I hope to be on Armed Services Committee where I can lead the charge, just like former Congressman John McHugh and also, Congressman Owens did as well, to make sure we're working to make sure that people know that this has to stay a jewel of the military and that the person from Watertown, if I'm lucky enough to be your elected official, will do everything to make sure that the sequestration, which unfortunately is just another example of D.C. gone amok, a policy that was never supposed to be put into law. Again, career politicians and D.C. insiders just passed bad legislation that instead of taking a scalpel to a budget and making sure what we can afford is just random cuts. And now we in the North Country are nervous and feeling that effects. It makes no sense.
Just to be clear, though, so you would have voted no on sequestration then?
Yes, I would have voted no.
Okay.
The importance of Fort Drum is much more important than cable TV and malls. The economic impact is over $1 billion annually from Fort Drum. I have a record of speaking out against the defense cuts resulting from sequester, the across-the-board defense cuts. One of the roles I played in Washington was helping form the Defending Defense Coalition, which was one of the first conservative voices that spoke out against sequestration. So I am very committed to fighting against these defense cuts. I think we need to look elsewhere in our federal budget to find savings and focus on the true drivers of our debt. I also hope to partner with other members of the New York State delegation, Democrat or Republican, and be a strong voice to fight for Fort Drum and encourage a missile defense site to move to Fort Drum and increase funding for Fort Drum.
Great. Thank you very much, Liz.
In my defense, I mean, I know she's not from here, but it was a pretty big, important thing when Fort Drum came and huge economic opportunities that came all across the board. So I don't appreciate you belittling that, but the reality is there's people who've had wonderful lives and careers and businesses that have been developed based upon Fort Drum growing, and more importantly, that growth, the economic concentric circles of growth have been truly, truly blessed that we wouldn't have had without, again, Congressman Martin leading the charge to bringing the new Light Infantry Division here in Fort Drum. It was very, very important.
It is very important, and I'm not belittling anyone today. The only person who's belittling is my primary opponent. What's most important here is fighting on behalf of our military families, our military veterans, and all of the civilian workers who work on Fort Drum.
Okay. I'd like to actually move on to a different topic, which is the Paul Ryan budget. I know we've also all spoken about this. I know that, Ms. Stefanik, you've said that you would take a good look at it. And Mr. Doheny, I think you too have said that there are some elements that you like and some elements you don't like. But in terms of a yes or no straight answer on how you would have voted had you been in the House when this came up, I don't think either of you have gone there. I know that Paul Ryan, you did work for him, and he is coming, Congressman Ryan, to campaign with you on June 2nd, I believe, which is next week. Doesn't appearing with him sort of give the tacit approval of his plan? Would it not be difficult for you then, if you did go to the House, to maintain some sort of independence from him?
I'm committed to being being an independent voice for this district, and I think in its current form, I wouldn't necessarily support the Ryan budget. I hope to put forth my own solutions to help bring our budget to balance. What's most concerning to me, Liz, though, is the Democrats have failed to put forth any budget that brings us to balance. I think this speaks to the generational approach I hope to bring to represent this district in Washington. The endless spending that our country is currently on the path, my generation's going to have to clean up the mess. So I am in favor of modernizing our entitlements programs so that they're protected and preserved for future generations. For all the seniors and voters who are listening today, I will not touch those that are in or near retirement, your Social Security or Medicare benefits, but I do think we need more voices talking about the importance of balancing budgets at the national level.
Just 2 points. You then wouldn't necessarily support it in its current form, but you can't say whether or not you would have voted yes or no when the last time it came up onto the floor for a vote.
Correct. I don't support it in its current form, Liz.
So you would have voted no then?
Yes.
Okay. And also in terms of the age of retirement, you're open to that discussion when it comes to Medicare?
I'm open to it for future generations. Again, for those seniors that are in or near retirement, so age 50 and above, I think we should not change to the system. They've earned those benefits. But for future workers, as our work lifespan is much longer, I think I'm open to that discussion.
Mr. Doheny.
I would have voted no against the Ryan budget. And there's really two reasons for that. Number one, Congress already passed a budget. So one of the problems I have, and again, as a businessman, I want to change in Washington, are these votes that have no meaning. I mean, Congress already passed a budget that went on to 2015. So it was just a political show vote. That makes no sense. We have so many hours, so many legislative days. So that needs to change. Number two, in terms of the actual budget itself, I want to bring a common sense approach. I want to do three things that are unheard of. Number one, I want to audit each and every department and sub-department that we actually spend money on. We do in every one of my businesses we run, and it doesn't seem like it's getting done in Washington. Number two, something called sunsetting. The idea you pass a law, and there's never an end. It doesn't matter if it was 150 years ago. That laws have a certain purpose, certain time. World changes, technology changes. But guess what? These laws never get sunsetted. Let's actually check. It doesn't have to be 3 years. It could be 10 or 15 years to actually check. Does the budgeting / legislation actually passed? Is it worked? What are the ups and downs to it? And should it be changed? It doesn't actually happen. And lastly, we have to have a balanced budget amendment. We just can't trust people in Congress. The DC insiders, they cannot get it right. We've tried time and time again. We've had this discussion for decades now. We have to have a balanced budget amendment to lock people in. It's just that simple. That's why I would vote against the Ryan budget. It doesn't meet all those criteria.
Matt, you referenced the Ryan-Murray budget deal. Do you support that budget deal?
I think we have
I'm
questions.
sorry, go ahead.
Already.
No, please continue.
Sure.
Forgive me.
The budget deal itself?
Yes. You referenced that as the
I was just saying that's actually what was passed. So would I have voted in favor of it? I don't know. Probably.
Well, I wouldn't have, and the reason I wouldn't have voted in favor of that budget deal is because for all the families who are based at Fort Drum and for all the military veterans, that budget deal cuts veterans' benefits, and I'm going to be a committed voice to ensure that our veterans receive the services they've earned. This is a difference between us, Matt.
Mr. Doheny?
I'm going to leave the questioning to you, Liz.
Okay. Well, we'll go on to a different topic then. We're going to go on to the Americans for Tax Reform's Taxpayer Protection Pledge. It's a favorite topic of Republicans. It's a promise not to raise taxes. It's ironclad, supposedly. Are you worried that you're closing the door, though, on what might be a necessary step in the event of a fiscal crisis by signing this pledge, which you have? And are you ceding your responsibility for making hard decisions and ceding that to a special interest group, which holds over your head this pledge that you have signed?
Well, look, first of all, the pledge is a pledge to the voters of the 21st Congressional District that I will not raise their taxes. And I mean it because I'm actually willing to put my name on a piece of paper. Let's be very clear. For anyone who wants to represent the Republican Party in a national election, for that person to say that I'm not going to promise to the voters of that particular district, in this case the great 21st district, almost precludes them from being the nominee. This is something fundamental. You're going to hear rhetoric from my opponent right now that Harry Reid would bless and be very comfortable on. So again, we have a spending problem in Washington. It takes a businessman to try to stop the out-of-control spending and bring us back into fiscal sense. And so right now, when you have over $3 trillion of revenue, and to say, you know what, I'm not going to put a penny more on the backs of the voters voters, especially Republican voters in this primary, I think it goes without saying. And again, in a Republican primary, to go ahead and use the Democratic talking points makes no sense.
Okay, just to be clear before we get going here, you would choose to say no to new taxes, even if it meant sending the country off the fiscal cliff?
Look, right, very simply, because guess what? It's a false choice. You can actually cut budgets. You can reduce spending. Happens in businesses. Happens businesses I run every day, Liz. It's very simple.
If you're the executive of the business, but if you're a member of a conference, it's a different story.
Congress actually gets to pass the laws and the funding and the appropriations process to not fund those programs. So again, you can do it from Congress. That is why Congress is closest to the people, have every 2-year elections to make sure they know what the voters and what the elected representatives want to spend their money on. That's the appropriation process.
Ms. Stefanik.
Liz, I'm going to go to Washington to cut taxes and overhaul the tax code for a flatter and fairer tax system. I will not sign pledges to Washington, D.C. special interest groups. I think the most important pledge you make is to the voters in the district, and that's what I've pledged to do, is represent the voters in this district. With my family's background, operating a small business that works with hundreds of businesses throughout the district, I understand that the tax burden is too high. It's strangling our small businesses. We need to cut taxes because at the federal level, we don't have a taxing problem in this country. We have a spending problem. But I will not sign pledges to Washington, D.C. special interest groups. I will only pledge to the voters of this district. And if they want to hold me accountable, they can.
Just to be clear then, and I'll put the same question to you, if it came down to a choice, raising taxes or sending the country off the fiscal cliff, which would you choose?
I agree that it's a false choice and we need to focus on balancing the budget, and the answer is not raising our taxes.
Okay, just to be clear though, we actually have been there, so it's a false choice but not a hypothetical.
I think it's an example of Washington broken in general. I think the government shutdown is an example of why Washington is so ineffective. We need new independent voices who are dependent upon their constituents, that are representing their constituents, instead of these Washington, D.C. based interest groups where you sign away your name to someone who makes a choice, depending upon what the issue is. We should be pledging to the voters of this district, and that's what I'm doing.
And look, this is a perfect example. This is really the race in a nutshell. Like, I pledged to the voters. I haven't pledged to anyone else other than the voters.
I pledged to the voters of this district.
And that's why I actually...
And I haven't signed any outside group pledges.
Kindly let me finish. And that's why I actually signed my name to it, because I have that important. But again, that's what happens with these D.C. insiders. That's what comes down the race, where you're talking about all the issues she is, as opposed to trying to do what's right for the folks, the small business people and the families in the 21st Congressional District. There's a clear choice.
One last time. Go ahead.
Sure. I think this is an example where I will be an independent voice on behalf of this district. Matt's the one signing pledges to Washington, D.C. special interest groups. I'm not. I'm pledging to the voters about what my specific positions are on these issues. And as I said, I will go to Washington to cut taxes and overhaul the tax code. And I've said that to voters across the district this past year.
Again, to be very clear, Liz, this is a pledge to the voters. And if you cared enough to actually live up to your word, you'd have no problem signing it. Let's leave it at that.
Okay, let's move on to a different topic. Equally important, I think, to the members of pretty much the entire state, but also specifically the 21st. There is a general perception, unfortunately, that the Republican Party represents the well-to-do, or the 1%, right? This is sort of the shorthand of the party. You may or may not agree with it. Probably you don't. But Mr. Doheny, you in particular have done quite well in your career. You're both successful in your respective careers. Some critics have suggested that this idea of the Republicans being pro-business is puts them at a disadvantage when it comes to issues like minimum wage. So the Democrats are calling, particularly the president at this point, for a federal minimum wage increase. Do you think, and you have done quite well, as I mentioned, do you think you can empathize with somebody who is living paycheck to paycheck, making minimum wage, a single mother, for example, living in the 21st? And would you press the House GOP leadership to bring a clean minimum wage bill to the floor for a vote?
Well, I grew up in Alexandria Bay. My dad, I was out of school. I went to college and law school and pretty much had to borrow my way through. So I had almost $200,000 of debt. That's where I started off my career, Liz. And so through hard work, the teachings and the well-founded education my parents and schooling gave me, I was able to go out and live my own version of the American dream. I mean, if you ask people up and down High Street, maybe they said I was a decent hockey player, they wouldn't think I'd go on and be a successful businessman. That's what makes America great. No one gave me anything. I didn't have it handed down. I did it all on my own, 2 hands in my brain. That's what makes America the great place that it is. So that's the message I want to convey. Because unfortunately, you're hearing out of the White House, people who've gone on to be successful. Doesn't matter what field it is, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, government, that they basically get run down by President Obama and the administration. We need to stop that. I'm just going to be one voice, but a voice that says, I want those people out there, especially the young people, to go out and live their own American dream. Now, when it comes to minimum wage, certainly, as you know, the state has already passed a bill. Yeah. So I believe in states and the laboratories of democracy actually figuring it out. So right now, New York, I guess it's been a little over a year or so ago, already passed the minimum wage to get it up at the end of next year to $9 per. And we'll find out how that plays out. I mean, I think that already squares away. That certainly puts it higher in terms of a wage relative to the $7.25 that is in the federal stage. And again, I believe in limited government. The federal government doesn't have all the answers, and so I would not push the House because right now it's already been taken care of in our state. Again, let's have states battle it out, and that's where you can see migration, both in terms of jobs and people. Again,
migration out of New York,
unfortunately, and that's part of why I'm running for Congress. As a businessman, I know how challenging it is. People say, let's wave our magic wand and create jobs. It doesn't work that way. We need to have people that get good ideas, entrepreneurs we call them, or other folks who are willing to take the risk, get capital, start a business. Only when you get to a certain size and certain need, then you bring jobs in. It's simple as that. That's the understanding I have, and that's what I'm trying to do here in the 21st, Liz.
Ms. Stefanik.
My family's business, we understand the economic challenges facing residents of upstate New York because we do business on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis with small businesses such as cabinet makers, family-owned lumber yards, furniture manufacturers. We employ truck drivers, we employ forklift operators, sales representatives, managers, and we're proud to pay much more than minimum wage for all of our workers at our family small business. So I think the best people to determine the correct minimum wage are our small businesses. Liz, I would be open to having a vote on increasing the minimum wage, but I think it's very important that our small businesses are a part of that conversation.
So then there have been businesses, of course, very large ones, that are now paying voluntarily higher than minimum wage. But you're, just to be clear, saying not only would you leave it up to the small businesses if in fact they want to go ahead and act on their own, but you would be open to saying to the Speaker, to Speaker Boehner, bring a clean minimum wage bill to the floor.
I would be open to that, but I think we need to ensure that small businesses are part of that conversation and have a seat at the table to help prepare that legislation. And additionally, when we're talking about growing the economy, the best way to grow the economy is not raising the minimum wage, it's creating jobs. And we do that by cutting taxes, reducing the regulatory burden, and repealing Obamacare.
This is a clear distinction. I mean, I believe in the free market. The wage that needs to be someone providing a good or service to someone else, the market will take care of here. My opponent doesn't seem to agree with that. This is a fundamental distinction, Liz.
Which is good because you guys sound familiar on so many issues since it is a Republican debate. So it is good to see some distinction. We're going to move on to a political question, I think.
Yeah, I think in the past few years, especially in this district, we've seen a third-party candidate play a role, and I think the GOP and the Republicans would say a third-party candidate has played a role in determining the winner of this seat the past few elections. I know that Mr. Doheny has the Independence Party line, and I know Ms. Stefanik has the Conservative Party line. My question is knowing how much of the role that plays in the outcome, which has led to a Democrat getting this seat the past few years, according to GOPers and the Republicans, would you, I guess my question is to you, Ms. Stefanik, is would you actively campaign for the Conservative line if you were not successful on the 24th?
I will be on the ballot this November as the Conservative Party nominee, and I'm the only candidate who can unite Republicans and Conservatives to win back this seat. As you pointed out, Brian, we've seen before that this district is lost by a split ballot. That's why winning the Conservative Party nomination and the Republican endorsement gives me the best opportunity to ensure that Republicans take back this seat this November.
But the question was, and to be fair, the question was, will you actively campaign on the 25th for that line, for that third-party line, if you are not on the Republican line?
I'll be on the Conservative Party line this November, and I think it gives me a great shot to win the Republican primary.
So, not answering the question there?
I will be the Conservative Party nominee, and this is why I think we can unite Conservatives and Republicans, which my primary opponent can't do.
Okay. Mr. Doheny?
I feel very comfortable where we are in this election process. I've been blessed to win 2 Republican primaries before. I feel confident that we will win a 3rd primary. The reason? Because I'm going out and knocking doors. I've been in over 30 towns and villages all over this great district, seeing people firsthand. And and you know what they ask me? They say, you know what? How are you going to bring common sense to Washington? We talk about my plan, my business background. They say, you know what, I'm glad you're in the race. You know what, because you have the persistence, the dedication, and the commitment to this district.
And you also failed to answer the question. I mean, as it's being asked, neither one of you answered the question. Will you know what it's done. It's happened to you.
I was just going to say, Brian, I know firsthand. So I'm going, again, if in the odd chance that I'm not fortunate to be successful on June 24th, I'm going to reevaluate and take a good hard look at that on June 25th. That's why I'm not going to make any prognostications, and I'm going to look at it honestly to see where we are on June 25th based upon the information at that time.
One last chance.
I see you nodding, so I'm just wondering what that means.
I think it's important for both of us to reevaluate, but the reality is my name will be on the ballot as the Conservative Party nominee. And I just want to point out something that Matt referenced. He did win the Republican primary, and he had the support of the county committees across the district. This is quite telling that this year, when given the choice, hundreds of committee members across this congressional district chose to go in a new direction, which is why I've won the endorsements of 11 of the 12 counties in the district. People are looking for a new voice with a new direction and the ability to win this November.
Brian, just to correct the record, you know the truth that she was endorsed by the Republican committees before Owens retired, before I even got in the race. Number 2, I was endorsed by the local conservative committees, but the state chair and the statewide people overrode the local people on the ground. I think it's quite telling. Last week we released our 160-person 12-county leadership team, with people all over this district, from county clerks down to town clerks, from supervisors to highway superintendents. We have tremendous support on the ground, and that's why we're looking forward to the voters deciding this, not elected party insiders or other DC insiders.
We are going to stick with congressional campaigns, and we know this is not an issue that's unique to New York, but in recent years, many of the state's congressional campaigns have been what I think many people would view as nasty, and most recently in 2012 in the 21st district, it was one of the most expensive in history, with more than $1 million spent on each side, and also somewhat negative. Would either one of you, and this question goes first to Mr. Doheny, abstain from personal negative attacks, and would you also indicate to your supporters, the outside national parties, to keep this a, quote, clean campaign?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we want to talk about the issues and the person's background and qualifications. I mean, that's why I led off the story in terms of all the candidates, who actually is from the district, who's going to live here, who actually raising their family here, who actually has real business experience. I mean, I have a decade and a half of proven track record of saving and creating tens of thousands of jobs. And who's the person who's been to every single town? I know the difference between Moira and Mariah. I've been to Ellenburg and Ellisburg. I mean, that is fundamental to understanding how you can represent a large 16,000 square mile district. I've actually done the work, I know the people, and I understand the issues. So be very clear, the answer is yes. Let's keep it clean, but let's talk about the comparison and let's talk about the issues. And so certainly, there's only one candidate up here who has a super PAC coming in for them. I mean, that tells you where we are at the state of this race. We go out, put in money. I'm actually the largest donor in my own campaign. My opponent has DC insiders that are funding her campaign through a super PAC. That's where this race stands right now, and I think people, my supporters, but more importantly, all the voters here in the 21st need to know we're talking about issues and we're talking about clearly the backgrounds.
Ms. Stefanik?
This is a classic example of Washington doublespeak. Matt Doheny is the only candidate who has been filling Republican primary voters' mailboxes with untruthful personal attacks on my public record. His own hometown newspaper called him out for this untruthful statements because he even referenced them, and it was a false reference. So I'm the only candidate who's run a positive campaign focused on the issues of how we can create jobs, how we can provide economic opportunity for our hardworking families. And look, I'm not a self-funder. I haven't spent millions of dollars in previous congressional races. I don't have the ability to do that. But what I have done is I've raised small dollar donations from every single county, almost every single town in this district who have chosen to support a new direction. And that's what I'm focused on, is getting the support of the local donors and local supporters, where the $5, $10 check is more meaningful than self-funding with millions of dollars.
Before we allow the rebuttal, and we will, just could you address the super PAC? issue, if you would? I mean, do you think it's appropriate for outside interests, be they from Washington or elsewhere, to be trying to imprint and influence this race?
I have no control over outside groups. Many outside groups have spent millions of dollars on Matt's failed candidacies before. I'm focused on running my campaign and running my race with positive messaging based upon the issues that voters want to hear about in this district: how we're going to create jobs, how we're going to cut taxes, and how we're going to fit Washington. So I have no control over that, Liz, and I'm focused on running the best campaign I have with support across the district.
Mr. Doheny.
I find it remarkable that my opponent, who went out to Aspen, Colorado for an elite Republican donor weekend, for her to say, I have no idea, I'm shocked that a super PAC's here supporting me. I mean, this is what it comes down to. I mean, who knows who these people are? I'm sure it's part of your DC insider crowd. And so that's what this race is all about. Are we going to go ahead and give the North Country seat to outside forces, to people who didn't grow up in the district, to outside super PACs who are just trying to influence the outcome here? It's a clear choice for the voters, especially here in the Republican primary on June 24th.
Ms. Stefanik?
You had significant outside support in your previous runs for Congress, Matt, and you failed multiple times to win back this seat. Voters are looking for a new direction. Everyone's looking for a new direction in this district so we can win this fall.
Well, and I'm glad you brought it up. So again, when I go door to door, I mean, I know we're winning. People are excited. They're excited I'm back in the race. Number two, again, let's talk a little history. I know you weren't here, but we had two of the closest races in the country against a popular Democratic incumbent. And third, we just released our poll. We tested it, myself versus a Democratic candidate. And I'm up 2-1, over 22 points. So what you just said, excuse me, what you just said is not true. That right now people know that giving me the trust, the Republican nomination, means not only can we, but we will be successful come November.
Just to be clear, that poll did not include your opponent's name, correct? That poll was just yourself against a hypothetical.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm focused on winning the primary, Matt. If I were you, I wouldn't be counting my chickens before they hatch. And what was most interesting about that poll is your support is actually lower than it was in 2012 and 2010 against Democrat incumbent Congressman Bill Owens. You actually have less support in the district than you have on your previous elections. So I'm focused on running my primary race. It's going to be a challenging primary, and that's what I'm focused on. I don't want to give you some advice, but that's what I suggest you focus on as well.
Again, since you're the DC insider, I appreciate that.
Okay, let's leave it here for the moment, and we'll move on to something else. This also has been in the papers. Mr. Doheny, you have a former staffer, a woman who's worked on your previous campaigns, who has she claims that you hadn't paid her what you owed to her, and that she has this pending workers' comp claim that has not been settled. And I know that your campaign has characterized this as a case of a disgruntled employee, which is certainly something that people can understand. But there are critics who would say that this is a lapse in judgment, or a sort of an example of how perhaps you might not be prepared to run a congressional office, particularly one of the size. When we started at the outset, you were talking about having all of these district offices and all of these employees. So how is it that you reassure folks who are looking at these stories and reading them in the paper that you're actually capable of doing that?
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up, because look, this is a case of one woman who is a vendetta against me, to be very clear. I mean, it's not just one action. She's tried to personally harm me in many different ways. And so again, we're working through the legal process to make sure that's right and justice is going to happen here. But more importantly, look, I'm the business person. I know how to run offices. I understand how to make sure that we get the most out of every single dollar. So again, when we're talking about one person who we had to unfortunately let go from the campaign, who, to be clear, is helping my opponent's campaign somehow cloud the judgment of a successful businessman who knows how to run large organizations, large and small, to be is false, and it's a false issue for voters.
It's still an ongoing issue. It's not been settled.
Because that's in the legal process, and we're letting the lawyers, run it through.
And I just want to address that accusation, Liz. This started well before I announced my candidacy for Congress. This has to do with Matt Doheny and his decision not to pay staff members. It has nothing to do with my campaign, so please don't accuse me of being a part of this process when the whole legal process started well before I announced my candidacy. That's just the truth,
Liz. But the woman in question is not helping you or volunteering for you or engaged in your campaign in any way?
She isn't. I'm proud to I'm sure she'll vote for me, because I don't think she'll be voting for Matt Doheny in the Republican primary, but she is in no way officially a part of my campaign.
I think everybody in Plattsburgh knows that this woman is helping Elise. And again, it's a false claim. It's being worked through the legal process. There's nothing we can do other than let the process go to fruition and hopefully get resolved as soon as practicable. It's a non-issue.
Okay, I do want to broaden out the conversation. We'll remain with a question about women, and Ms. Stefanik, we'll put this one to you. Republicans have been accused by Democrats, both here in New York and also nationally, and I'm sure, as you're all too aware from the last presidential, of waging a war on women. And so at this point, we're talking a lot about abortion rights, particularly in New York, but of course at the federal level too. First, do you believe that there is a war on women, specifically as it relates to the perceived erosion of abortion rights, and how far do you believe that the federal government should go in order to curb or preserve access to those services?
This is a great question, Liz, and I think this is why I provide an opportunity for Republicans to win back women that we lost in previous elections. There is a war on women right now, but it's coming from the failed Democratic economic policies. If you look at who is suffering the most, it's actually my demographic. Women aged 18 to 29 have high employment rates, well over 12%. If you look at food stamps, which are exploding under this current administration, the majority of those recipients are women, oftentimes single mothers. If you look at healthcare decisions, 80% of healthcare decisions are made by women in their families, and they're seeing healthcare increases. So I think the true war on women is the economic war on women waged by President Obama. And in terms of my position on the life issue, I am pro-life. I'm the only pro-life candidate in this race. I have 3 exceptions: rape, incest, and life of the mother. As a woman, that's my belief on this issue, and you know, that's how I will vote in Congress.
Mr. Doheny.
Yeah, I agree with my opponent. I mean, I think when you think about the war on women, you know, part of why I'm running for Congress is that single mom who's living in Clayton, who's like, how am I going to make ends meet? How can I actually continue to go forward? That's why we need to revitalize the economy here in the 21st Congressional District. Of all the 62 counties in the state, Jefferson County has the 2nd highest unemployment as of a month or so ago. I mean, it's unacceptable. And so when you talk about actually empowering people, the single woman, you know, the grandmother, you actually make sure that you have opportunities to stay and live a full, robust life right here in the North Country. So I applaud my opponent. I think she's spot on that issue. Look, when it comes to the question, the second part of the question, that, you know, it's a personal choice. You know, I've been very clear that I'll get a 100% pro-life voting record in Congress, and people can judge upon that.
Okay, so we have come to that point that everyone is waiting for. It's the lightning round. We're going to lighten things up just a little bit. We get to ask the candidates a series of yes or no questions. Brian, I think you're going to kick things off.
Yeah, we talked about Fort Drum earlier. Have either one of you, we'll start with Matt, have you been on Fort Drum in any of those simulators, the shooting simulators, the roller simulators? Have you ever been able to test one of those out?
I asked, and I wasn't able to. So.
No.
I wanted to go too, but I wasn't able to either.
They don't let you on there pretty easily.
Okay. Mr. Doheny, have you ever climbed a high peak?
I have not.
I have.
Which one?
Cascade.
Okay.
We know Lake George is certainly a big part of the district, the queen of American lakes, as it's called. Have either one of you ever ridden the Minnehaha?
I have.
I have not, but I think the queen of the district is Lake Champlain, but I'm biased.
Brian?
Talking about the size of the district again, rooftop highway, would you support funding for a rooftop highway?
I think it's too costly, so I'm open to discussions about investing in our infrastructure. I think we need to improve the infrastructure we have today.
That was a very long yes or no. I'm sorry, which one was that?
The rooftop.
Yes or no?
Not the current proposals.
Fair enough. Mr. Doheny?
Yes, but if someone travels Route 11, if we can't get there, we still need to improve Route 11, but the answer is yes.
Okay, Mr. Doheny, if you had been invited, would you have attended the Kim Ye wedding this weekend?
Absolutely.
Ms. Stefanik?
No, I would have been focused on Memorial Day events.
Okay. I think, is this, unfortunately, we're out of time. So sad, because we have great questions. But we do have to go to closing statements, which I believe, Mr. Doheny, you are going first.
Okay. Again, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to debate my opponent. Thank you, Brian, Liz, Matt, and the folks here at Time Warner. We just had a great hour-long debate. And again, I started off the top of the broadcast with saying this race really comes down to one word: experience. Again, I'm a self-made businessman. I understand how challenging it is to make ends meet, to make sure that we hit payroll, to make sure that we continue to grow and thrive. As a self-made businessman, I can provide the knowledge, skill set to the voters here at the 21st Congressional District. Experience of being around the district, growing up and understanding the issues, making sure you know the difference between Lake Placid and Lake Pleasant, understanding the challenges that face all the people, whether you live in any of the 194 towns or cities. And lastly, the experience of actually caring enough to not only grow up, and live with your family, but also to live the rest of your life in the district that you love, that you want to represent in Washington. I'm just looking for the opportunity, and I ask the people of the 21st, if you're a Republican, I ask for your vote on June 24th. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Stefanik.
As the viewers have seen tonight, this primary is a clear choice, and I'm the only candidate who can unite Republicans and conservatives to win this fall. If you elect me, I will hit the ground running in Washington on day one, fighting against President Obama's failed economic policies, standing up for our constitutional liberties, especially the Second Amendment, and supporting our nation's troops. While I respect my primary opponent's decision to run for the fourth time, he represents politics the old and tired way. If you're looking for new leadership and a breath of fresh air in Washington, if you want someone who represents Main Street small businesses and not Wall Street, if you, like me, believe we need a new generation of conservative leadership in Washington, I hope to earn your vote, and I humbly ask for your vote on June 24th. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you, Matt Doheny. It's been a privilege debating with you.
Thank you both very much. That does conclude our debate, and that is between the candidates in the Republican primary for the 21st Congressional District. Thank you to Elise Stefanik and Matt Doheny for participating, and thanks to my colleagues Brian Dwyer and Matt Hunter for being on the panel with me. The primary, as you've heard, is June 24th. If you are a registered Republican in the district, be sure to get out and vote, and of course stay with Time Warner Cable News and Capital Tonight for more coverage of Decision 2014. This debate will be available to you on our website, twcnews.com, also on our local on-demand channel 1020. I hope you watch it again if you have a chance. Thank you for joining us. Good night.